Baptist Church of Nashville. My name is Jay Tiefenbrunn, and I'm very pleased to be your Director of Music Ministries. Good morning! I'd like to invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join in singing our opening song, number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. I have a chorus of percussion happening. Enter, rejoice, and come in, number 361. Please rise in body or in spirit as you're so moved and join in the singing. Counter melody to this that the choir is going to support us with, right, choir? Right. We'll sing it together once through, and then we'll break into a round. Section 1, Section 2, Section 3. Yay! Can I have the tonality? Oh, sure.
Worship
Good morning. Please take a moment and greet your neighbors. Yay! Yay, choir!
I'm upright, I get a cookie. I kind of am too.
Within you there is light, the same light as the source, the same radiance that is in all creatures. May this small flame be a constant reminder to you of your true nature and your kinship with all beings.
I'd like to join together our hearts and minds in the spirit of worship with these words by Rumi. Now, the hymn we just sang was taken from words from Rumi, who is a 13th century Sufi Muslim mystic. And these words are also from him. Daylight, full of small dancing particles, and the one great turning. Our souls are dancing with you. Without feet they dance. Can you see them when I whisper in your ear?
Good morning. My name is Kell. Anybody who wants to participate or try this whirling thing, please go ahead and step out into the aisles. Come on, come on. Boys and girls, kids of all ages. Come on. Now be careful that you do not, fall on your head or hit your neighbor while you're trying this. Why we do this is something that we will get into a little more later, but I'd like to talk a little about how we do it. So if you would, just go ahead and turn to your left, just spin in a circle. Yeah. Yep. Getting dizzy yet? Okay. Okay, now stop. Feel what happens when you do that? Okay, now let's try the other way. Let's go right. All right, now stop. Ooh. So that was probably, I want to say that was probably 10, 15 seconds each time. If you want to do this for a longer period, here's what you would do. Maybe? I don't know. The first thing is the foot placement. If you're going to your left, you would turn your left foot out as far as it would go, place it, and then whirl around, and then put your right foot as far around as it'll go. So it's kind of, yes. So you're not just standing on one foot and paddling yourself around like this. You're using both feet equally. So that's the first thing. The second thing is zip up the front, which means engage your core muscles in your stomach and chest, and have very straight posture. And then there's spotting. You'll see a lot of people hold out their hand and focus on that while they whirl, and that might help. So let's try that. Hold out your hand, posture nice and straight, and you use both feet evenly and just kind of almost walk in place in a circle. Yeah. Okay, now stop. It also helps to go slow, especially if you're just starting with this. So, do we have any casualties? Hopefully not. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Bob Day. I am a member of the board of directors here. I'm chair of the Resource and Development Council, which contains 6 committees that have to do with people and money. So if you have any questions about people or money, you can see me. It is my pleasure to welcome you here in the sanctuary and to those of you joining us online this morning. In order to reach a wider community than those able to be physically present on Sunday morning, our services are live streamed on YouTube and Facebook. You may subscribe to either one. Joys and concerns are not live streamed or recorded. Before I continue, please remember to silence your cell phones and other noise-making devices. As Unitarian Universalists, our spiritual paths vary, but in this congregation we have made a covenant together. We affirm our interdependence, celebrate our differences, and work for justice. We deepen our relationships as we create a compassionate, welcoming community, nurture spiritual growth, and act on our values in the broader world. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors worshiping with us this morning. We ask you to wear paper name tags because it helps us recognize you as someone we'd like to meet. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you may find it here. Whether you are new to Unitarian Universalism or visiting from another UU congregation, we invite you to stop by the welcome table in the social area after the service to have questions answered. People become members of this congregation by signing the membership book and supporting the church with their time and finances. If you are considering joining the church, please talk to our assistant minister, Denise Gouch, assistant minister for congregational engagement. Following the service, we hope everyone will enjoy coffee and fellowship in the social area, where you will also find information about current opportunities for engagement and reflection. There are a number of announcements in the blue weekly bulletin, which I hope you will take home and read. And we have one more. Today is the second Sunday of the month, and Gail Seavey, our lead minister, is hosting open office hours in her office in the Norris House next door from 12:30 to 2:30 this afternoon. It's first come, first serve, and the sessions are from 10 to 20 minutes each. Thank you.
I invite you now to bring yourself fully into this sanctuary, to know yourself part of this gathered community. And as you settle more deeply into your seats and become aware of your breathing, pause and know yourself here now with us. I invite you to look back over the last few hours, days, the last week. And as you do so, you may become aware of profound joys or sorrows that you have brought with you into this sanctuary this morning. If you would like to mark that, you are invited to come forward and place a stone in this bowl of water. Our lay minister this morning, Jack Bleak, will help you do that. If you would like your joy or concern spoken to the congregation, we invite you to use those yellow slips of paper, which you'll find in the pew right in front of you. If you write legibly, Jack or I will read them to the congregation. You can hand me those slips as you come forward. holding these joys, these precious things in our hearts, as well as those other things that lie yet there unspoken. Let us join in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, we gather this morning to whirl, and it's something we know already. These things and others, so much more, whirl in our hearts. The world whirls around us, turns around the sun. In the midst of all this whirling, we feel great gratitude to have found this community in which to gather together, to hold each other in our joys, to be comforted by each other in our sorrows, to keep company in all the things that concern and worry us. May our time together here be always something that fortifies us for our time out in the world. May the love and concern we show for each other here spread ever outward into the wider communities of which we are all a part. May our time together today make us ever better, more centered, more loving participants in the great dance of life. Blessed be. Amen. At this time in the service, I like to say that our gratitude overflows into the offering bowls, and the ushers will come among us with those offering bowls. You may know that this congregation shares is our church's Habitat for Humanity action team, who fundraises all year round, aiming toward our annual interfaith unity build. You may have come to the fundraiser last night, as a matter of fact, but you have another opportunity this morning to keep that generosity going toward the work, the good work that Habitat for Humanity does in the world. You can find instructions for online giving in your order of service if you're in the sanctuary. If you're joining us online, those instructions can always be found on our church website. As always, your presence among us is received with gratitude, as is your generosity.
name's Chad Wood, and I'm going to be doing a reading from Sacred Ecstasy by Yuval Rome. From the Greek, ecstasy means to be outside of oneself. In other words, ecstasy permits us to transcend individualistic perception, to sense beyond the regular senses which normally lead us to believe that we do not exist beyond our own flesh and mind. When we truly reach an ecstatic state, we are able to feel that we actually exist beyond ourselves, that we are everything. In a sacred ecstatic state of mind, we feel connected to all living things. We feel that we are within all creation and that creation is within all of us. Some might cry out at such a moment, "And God is in me," as some Sufi saints have expressed. But the words are not important. We may call source anything we like. A deep sense of unity of all things is what we are seeking, not an intellectual understanding of the idea of unity. It is a gut feeling, a sensation, a perception. Yet is this a true perception or just another illusion? The mystics of old have been saying for centuries and in various forms that the unity of all things is the true reality. They have insisted that we do exist beyond our bodies. Isn't it fascinating that recent research is now confirming that our brain neurons actually reach beyond our bodies, connect with, convey information to, and affect living things outside of our bodies? The implications of such neurological studies are far-reaching and support the mystic's assertion that we are inseparable from all creation. If we truly feel that we and the other are one, if we truly love the other as we love ourselves, then peace would be the natural consequence. Having gained this comprehension, we would never dump toxic waste in our neighbor's yard. We would be generous with a stranger, and we would never unleash violence in a distant part of the world. This is the essence of the ancient Greek commandment, "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." Even though the concept that you are everything is extremely difficult for us to truly internalize, there are numerous ways to experience it. Within ancient shamanic wisdom, it is told that music and ecstatic movement can move us outside ourselves so that we may reach an altered state of mind, a state of sacred ecstasy. The same goal of ecstatic rituals and celebrations conducted by Hasidic Jews, Sufi Muslims, and Pentecostal Christians. So maybe.
My name is Kell, and I have a whirling practice. I started this a few years back. I want to say I was inspired by and other people who do whirling as performance. I cannot meditate while sitting still. Whirling to me it almost feels like flying, and it does allow me to enter the ecstatic state, which I feel both I fully inhabit my body and I'm connected to everything outside me. I'm going to do this meditation in front of you and with you today. It helps to have participation from everybody here when I'm doing this, and doing it to live music, Chris the drummer, and your chanting really enables you to participate in the experience and for me to be connected to you. So we're kind of going to do this together, and she's going to teach the chant. You know the beats.
I got this.
Yeah.
That's not on anymore. Your mic is not.
Oh, it's not?
It's not connecting. So Kell has a whirling practice, and we're going to provide the chanting while she whirls. So the chant is, we are a circle. We are a circle. Within a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. With no beginning. And never ending. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a circle. Within a circle. With no beginning. And never ending. We are a Blessed be.
Where our choir is coming up, I wanted to introduce to you an image that I think bridges for me what Kell just did. Now, Kell does this whirling at our Chalice fire circles, and other people might be drumming and chanting, and she is doing this as her way to participate. And then at the other end is highly choreographed, the Seavey whirling dervishes that are in Turkey, where they also whirl and made it into a very complex choreography, which I'll talk about more. But what bridges one from the other is this use of ecstasy, different ways that people enter into a moment of ecstasy during a great variety of kinds of worship. The music they're going to be singing today is the kind of music that they, part of the worship service when I watched in Turkey the whirling dervishes whirl. Oh, did I love to dance when I was young. Janis Joplin, Chambers Brothers, I would dance long into the night, enter into trance until I was exhausted. Now, I had no idea any of that had to do with religion. I was off religion, 100% all through my late teens and through my 20s. Had nothing to do with spiritual practice, but I did know that when I danced, and it wasn't really whirling at all, it was what Gabriel Roth would call in her 5 rhythms pretty much chaos. I was very into, I was 100% into the rhythm of chaos. I lost all sense of self-consciousness. I became one with everybody there, so why be self-conscious, right? It was gone, and by the way, could not dance if I drank or took drugs. I had to do it, like, for real. Really, I couldn't do it. And not only did I feel one with everyone there and with the rhythms of the music, but eventually, as I got more and more exhausted and really entered trance, I felt one with everything. And it wasn't until I started to learn about the religions of the world that I understood that this quite natural human capacity for ecstasy was part of all religious traditions. You can imagine Kell swirling around the fire at Chalice fire. You can imagine, you've all seen different ways that in indigenous cultures that people have danced and used music to enter into this trance state, this feeling of oneness. I started to understand most profoundly how this was a spiritual practice when Jim and I had the opportunity to go to Turkey about 8 years ago. We were invited by some people here in Nashville who were Turkish people studying, mostly at Vanderbilt, but some in Cookeville, and they were Sufi Muslims. They were all followers of Fethullah Gulen, who the one thing Trump has not done that's good is he has not turned Fethullah Gulen in to the Turkish government, who, as they become more tyrannical, say that he's the one that has caused problems, but he hasn't. He's just a Sufi leader who teaches people that the Islamic culture was very highly educated, encourages people to be educated, and he encourages people to have dialogue and talk to each other. But when I got there, so anyway, they were trying to build this sense of dialogue across cultures and graciously invited people here from town to take us around Turkey. And the first thing I noticed is that when we're riding around on these little white minivans everywhere, there'd be a downtime, and our guests would be reading this book that they said was by their spiritual leader, the Mevlana. So who's the Mevlana? It just means the guide or the master. And the name of the book, and there were volumes and volumes of this book, was their sacred scripture, and they called it the Mathnati, I can't even say it. Turkish was very hard for me to pronounce. But the Mathnawi turned out it was Rumi's poetry. Volumes and volumes of Rumi's poetry. It took me a while to figure out that their guide was Rumi, and that this book was Rumi poetry that I had obviously not read all. There was 1,200 couplets in these 6 volumes, so obviously I had not read all of that. And so they took us to Konya, where Rumi said this was their sacred center, a real pilgrimage site, where there is a beautiful mosque with this big green dome and what was a school and then a monastery and is now a shrine. That's where Rumi and his father and many of the great Sufi teachers were buried, and also a museum. And while we were there, I really learned the story of Rumi's life. He was born in the early 1200s in Afghanistan, and as a child, the Mongol hordes were coming and driving people away. So his family, which was really a tribe, it's almost like imagining Abraham going off with the tribe to find a new land. He went off with his tribe and traveled. His whole childhood, he was traveling all through the Middle East. Now, his father was known as one of the great Muslim scholars of his day. And so they spent time in all of the intellectual centers of the day, including Damascus and Jerusalem. And so he was brought up with this incredibly rich Islamic education. They were given a place to live in the middle of Turkey, which was in this part was the Seljuk Empire. And his name is Rumi because his real name is Jalal. They just had a name, Jalal, one name. And then it's Abin, that just means where you're from, Rumi. And Rum just meant Anatolia in their language. So he was Jalal from Anatolia, but we know him, took the Rumi as the name that most people in the world think of him as. While he was there, they settled down and built a school, and people came to study Islam. And he, in his studies, was kind of inducted into a Sufi sect, learning its deeper mysteries. And it was all in his head. And then his father died, and he kind of took over, and he became the great teacher. Again, it was all in his head. He was a scholar. And then everything changed. He was in his late 30s, and this wandering mystic showed up at the school named Shams of Tabriz. And he looked like a wild man. He had on, rough clothing, very poor. He had a staff and nothing else. And he whirled. And he taught Rumi to whirl and to be in trance. He showed him what mysticism really was to experience, not just to study. And Rumi became a different person to the people around him. He stopped teaching them intellectual things, and they felt very angry about this. They felt like he had deserted them as he went deeper and deeper into this mystical life. And so his students drove Shams away, and he came back. And they drove him away a second time, and he came back. And the third time, they murdered him because they wanted their teacher back. At least that's how they tell the story. And so they didn't get their teacher back, though. He stayed there. He was still the head of this madras, this school. But he withdrew even more into trance. He started spouting off in trance this poetry. He didn't write this poetry. He would just be walking along and all of a sudden start trancing, or he would, and spouting off these couplets. He would be at dinner and just start saying them, or he'd be asleep and he'd start saying them. So two of the monks, and now they were thinking of it as a monastery because he wasn't doing a whole lot of teaching, so people were staying there as monks. They followed him around night and day, and they wrote this all down. So they saw this sacred text as coming channeled straight from the divine. Kind of like the Quran they saw as a sacred text being channeled straight from God. So at the same time, he was developing this sacred art of whirling and this kind of music, which was more trance music, into a very elaborate, highly choreographed art form. So when we were at the museum, in the rooms where the monks lived, they had this place where the beginners started to learn to whirl. And there was a nail, just a big nail in the ground, and it was kind of in the middle of this board that was loose. It would pivot around the nail. And the board was just the right size to put your foot on, and then you practice whirling around on this. But they had a slightly different, there's different techniques for whirling so that you don't throw up or fall flat on your face. And their technique was different than the most Western, like if you watch ballet, the ballet the other night was fabulous. There was a wonderful whirling scene. It was a very sensuous trio. But they put their head out there and they turn the other hand down. But it looks like they close their eyes, but they don't. They focus inward on their heart. And the heart becomes the physical center. It becomes the center of gravity as well as the focus. So it's an inner focus. And they twirl around like this. And some of you have seen pictures. And they dressed in a very symbolic way. So very much, when they turn very much like Kell did with the whirling clothes out, but most of them wore white. And the white symbolized the death shroud because they wanted you to, life and death, whirling through life and death was part of the whirling, that kind of the big picture of a human life. And they wear these high hats. Have anybody of you seen pictures of them? These high hats are actually exactly the shape of the tombstones that they used. And so, like when we were at the shrine and saw all these, roomies buried under a big giant hat, it looks like, but it's the other way around. Okay. So that night, we went to the Conius Cultural Center, because it's the only place big enough for them to hold worship with the whirling dervishes. Now, many people, hundreds of people were there, and I know many of the people were there like tourists to go see this. It's really cool. But the people we were traveling with, this is their worship service. This is how they worship together. And it was very easy to enter into that spirit of worship with them. And what's fascinating, because we're such wordy people, there was no words at all during this worship service, not one. The music is often one side, and it goes slow, stately. It might be faster, but it actually was tended like this to be pretty slow and stately. And about 20 men dressed in white came out in a circle. There was always one, sometimes two men dressed in black, like Kell, who did not whirl. And nobody could explain what they did, but they clearly they'd walk out, and it was almost like a signal to move in a different way, because not only were they whirling around, but they were also moving, the 20, started off in a big circle. But that circle kept changing, highly choreographed. So I used to be in marching band in high school. I hated it, but it was like that. It was like, you had to at halftime march around into different formations. They are whirling in different formations, but everything was circles, moving in, moving out, around, and you felt like, because they were white and there was this black all around, and this soft music, this droning, fascinating music, you felt like you were entering into this very conscious participation with the whirling of the universe at every level. So you felt like the parts of yourself. Now, I would think atoms. I know that Rumi didn't, you know, how atoms and molecules are whirling around, but you felt that, and kinesthetically in your body, and then you felt like, much like you do when you're on a clear night and you're seeing all the stars, and you're seeing them slowly shift and move across the sky. So you kind of felt like, oh, here's the solar system, and here's the universe, until you were totally part of everything. And then it came back to the self again, as the circle got slower. And this went on for about an hour and a half. You had time to be with it kinesthetically. Now, I experience the world very kinesthetically, so for me, it was a wonderful opportunity. So what I, of course, wanted to learn more about Rumi's interpretation, the words that he put with these dances that he did. And he did talk about how the dance was a circle, all the different circling of from inside to outside to the universe, and that when you move into the spiritual journey, the first goal is to move beyond. Of course, he didn't use the word ego. That's a pretty modern word. He just talked about moving beyond the mind and love, or the heart. And as you move beyond it, you understand that you're part of everything larger than yourself, and then you understand that that's sacred, that you're part of the divine. And then as you return back, it enables you to serve that which you are a part of, which is all. All of creation is what he would have said. And I felt that. It made me understand that even when I was dancing, even when I had no interpretation, that it was part of my spiritual journey. That moving into trance did teach me what it was like to be one with everything. And it did renew me and allow me to come back and be of service in the world. Our Unitarian transcendentalists, great-grandparents, noticed that as they started studying the world's religions, that every culture in the world had ways of talking about being one with everything, being part of a greater unity. And they called that experience mysticism. There was no word that unified all of that. I mean, they would talk about mystics, but those were very individual Catholic practices that word was applied to. And they changed how Americans and then the world used the vocabulary of mysticism. We now apply it to all experiences of letting go of ego and feeling one with everything. And part of their philosophy was that this was a human capacity, a natural human capacity that they said was a capacity of the mind, just like being able to sense that there's time and space. We have the capacity as human beings, somehow in our mind, to sense this. Now, since then we know there's actually a biology to this. How many of you ever read that Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolt Taylor? Yeah, some of you have read it. It's a fascinating book that kind of helped me feel a little more sane, because I have a very well-trained right brain. Well, let me tell you, and sometimes you feel odd in our culture having a well-trained right brain, because we live in a culture with very well-trained left brains, which are the more verbal, analytical, logical part of our brains. And Jill Bolt-Taylor is a scientist who studied the brain. And she's a good scientist, and she had very highly developed and trained the left side of her brain, because that's what a science education's goal is to do. She was very good at it. And then she was a relatively young woman when she had a major stroke, and it was in the left side of her brain. And when you read it, it's just fascinating, because she's talking about how, she can't do anything practical. I mean, she can't even figure out how to dial the phone to get help, because that's like numbers and that kind of thinking. But at the same time, she's very aware that her brain is really working. But it's the other side of her brain that she's usually not aware of and is not well trained. And it feels great. She loves being there. It feels no anxiety. It feels one with everything, connected. It feels love. And she's like, who wouldn't want to stay here? That was a huge surprise to her. So as she heals, she's able to talk about that experience, because you kind of need the left side of the brain to talk about that. And that's what, a lot of poets and religious people are trying to do. They're just trying to find words to describe what is this experience that actually you're all there right now. It's happening. You have part of your brain is doing that right now, experiencing the world that way. So I would like to just posit that all of the arts, all of these religious practices, spiritual practices that develop skills are helping train us to be aware of that experience, that access, that experience that is available to us at all times. And quite honestly, I don't care if you call it art or religion. I don't care if it's dance or worship. I don't care if it's chant or prayer. It is an experience that is human. And I suggest that reason that so many people want to be in that place and why so many people take drugs is because it's a very renewing place. Maybe not so much with drugs, not so renewing, because then you don't know how to not do it without drugs. That happens to a lot of people. So what I'm saying is, I think that's why every culture has that urge to enter that place with drugs, because some drugs help you get there. But there are, through religious practice, through art, many ways to enter that place. So my wish for all of us, quite honestly, my wish for all of us, as we explore these skills that take us to ecstasy, to take us through trance, to feeling one with anything, that you find those ways for yourself, and that you honor them, that you already are doing them, that you honor them, and that the words that you put with it are wonderful for communication, but they're all interpretation, and it's the experience itself, whether you can put it into words or not. Just honor that. It is the experience in itself, and it is renewing. And it helps you better serve this world of which we are all a part. May it be so.
I'd like to invite you to rise in body or in spirit as you are so moved, and join in singing our closing song, number 208, Every Time I Feel the Spirit, hymn number 208. Above the mountains.
Please join me in the chalice extinguishing. The words are at the bottom of your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And I'd like to close these words with a poem, The Larger Circle by Wendell Berry. We clasp the hands of those who go before us and the hands of those who come after us. We enter the little circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in the dance, and the larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life who move also in the dance to a music so subtle and vast that no ears hear it except in fragments. This service is over. Let our service begin again, renewed.